Life. Hello, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Welcome to, I want to say like the 5th or 6th live by now. Today we have the amazing Arianna Zabriskie with us, and I just want to give her kudos because Ari, where are you right now?
I'm in Aix-en-Provence, France.
And what time is it right now?
Yeah, it's 2 a.m.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dedication. So thank you so much for being online with us, and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, thank you, Alexandria. I really appreciate it. And I was thinking about it, that's the beautiful thing about when you're doing something that you love, getting up at 2 a.m. for it, to talk about it is no problem at all. So I'm happy to be here. Truly, the pleasure is mine.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a little bit about my background is I'm a marriage and family therapist. I specialize right now working in addictions, and I also do a kind of an innovative concept in psychology, and I've created it myself as this coined term called conscious psychology.
Okay.
So essentially, it's the idea of practicing psychology from a more spiritually awakened perspective. So looking at, what kind of symptomology might clients be experiencing and what might be the underlying message behind that. That kind of this perspective that there is, a greater meaning to the everyday experiences of human experience. And so helping the client kind of uncover what that might be for them.
That's awesome. And so what drove you to coin the term conscious psychology? Because that's obviously right in line with a conscious coach. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially it started with beginning practicing and recognizing that there was a need, recognizing that a lot of the traditional perspectives in psychology are not necessarily limited, but they don't necessarily encompass this whole mind-body connection. I'd say that it is definitely improving. More and more people in the field of psychology are recognizing that we need to incorporate more information to clients about this mind-body connection. And also that comes with a sense of, journey of the mind-body connection for ourselves, because us as practitioners need to fully understand, at least have a beginning of the understanding of what it means to have the mind-body connection to help a client begin their journey of self-discovery. And I think a lot of it has to do with, honestly, their consciousness, how are they operating in the world, and how are they relating with their world around them? And what kind of coping mechanisms are they using on a day-to-day basis to function? And how are they functioning? What kind of level of functioning do they have? So looking at it from really a holistic perspective.
And I love that. I love how you said, also as practitioners having that, because a lot of practitioners, and I've heard a lot of coaches, good coaches, that are like, to be a coach, you need a coach, right? And so I like that you emphasize on that, as well as, we also need to do the work to be able to provide that clarity and support for your clients.
1,000%. I tell all the people in the field of psychology that I meet, you have got to do the work too. I mean, it is actually, I'd say, even far more important. Our education experience really should include personal development. And that's actually a big motivation as to why I created the title that I did create for my section. It's going to be How Are Coaches Forging the Way in Psychology? Because the beautiful thing about coaching is that, they've shown us that we're missing something, right? They've shown us a new way, truly, because being a coach, you have this kind of flexibility, this way to really innovate, really make it your own completely. You can create your own perspective, your theory that you might be working with your clients from, whether it be life coaching, whether it be spirituality, there's so many different topics that it could be about, but you really get to innovate yourself based on your own philosophy. In the world of psychology, the practitioner just doesn't have that much flexibility, not
Mm.
typically, and that's why, I really do admire coaches in the sense that I think they show us a way of what we're missing. And, I'm on a mission to bridge the gap because I believe that coaches and psychologists can actually work together, that we can forge the path together by bringing the pros and cons from both sides of it. So there's pros and cons to coaching, right? Because some of the cons that come with coaching is that maybe you don't necessarily have a template.
Mhm.
And like you said, takes a coach. You need a coach to be a coach, right? So if you don't necessarily have the template to work from, then you might need some guidance on what can be beneficial and what might not be beneficial. One of the biggest things is like boundary setting with clients, right? When you train to be a psychologist, they go over that in pretty intense detail of the do's and don'ts of the field, right? Like, it's very specific. And in coaching, you might not necessarily have someone sit you down and say, hey, look, these are the do's and don'ts, because there isn't really a rule book necessarily. And maybe by some associations, local, coaching associations, but for the most part, you have a lot of flexibility, which has its pros and cons, right? And same with psychology, there tends to be a lot of red tape in the field, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes working with a client can be difficult when you are restricted to 45 minutes of what insurance will pay, right? So it's like this philosophical discussion, well, can the healing actually happen in 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Where maybe it's more effective when working with a coach because you have a whole hour or more, dependent on what the client needs, right? So that's why coaches are really forging the way and showing us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like there's two things there that, like, one, I feel like psychologists have a limitation with the label of psychology, right? So in a lot of cultures, going to a psychologist or going to a psychiatrist is not really, it's very frowned upon, right? It's like, oh, we don't do that. And I've heard cultures say that, oh, I'm such and such culture and we don't do that, right? But a coach is more acceptable, I'd say, versus psychology.
Absolutely. And we talk about this all the time, right? Because there are certain people in the field that are threatened, right? Threatened by coaching and coaches. And I said, but they're showing us what's missing and they're showing us a new way to help clients. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing is we want healing to happen, right? Like, we people need healing. And if they find that with a coach or if they find that with a psychologist, fantastic, right? But what we're finding is that people are drifting more towards coaching. And why is that happening, right? They're showing us that the field of psychology is outdated, to be frank. There's things that are holding it back, all the red tape. It's restrictive. It's very restrictive. And so looking at it from that perspective and knowing that coaching does have a beautiful place in what's happening right now with the whole shift. And the biggest part of it is that it's stigma free. And so it is so much easier, especially for someone who's struggling with depression, because that's the number one thing, right? Is like specifically in depression, we find that those patients are the last to get help. And then, what else is really problematic is couples counseling. So couples tend to wait to the very last string until they come for therapy. And this is sad because when they wait so long, it's incredibly hard to fix at the very end, right? It's like, how many years have you been dealing with this symptom? And they say 7+ years, and you're going, okay, so I'm unraveling 14 years of damage, right? So
Yeah.
just an exaggeration there, but coaches don't have the stigma. So people are going to them more, and that is beautiful. It really is.
Yeah. One thing that we had in a personal conversation that I want to bring up of the way that psychologists that for it to be improved by insurance, so going back to that red tape, you have to give them a diagnosis, right? So then that can actually hinder them because, and I've seen a couple of documentaries on this and like in the real world of how, having a psychological diagnosis can actually hinder you from getting a job or doing certain activities, and how that actually causes people to, want to stem away from them. And so, yeah, of course I'll get a coach because they don't have to diagnose me with anything, versus being very on the straight and narrow and being diagnosed with something. So my insurance will approve it so I can't actually get that help.
Yes, absolutely. It's so true. I think that was the most astounding pieces of information that I learned while getting my master's in clinical psychology, was, discussing this whole concept of insurance versus non-insurance. Why would some therapists decide not to, be able to bill through insurance? And one of the biggest reasons is that you have to diagnose your patient. And it's like, gosh, I feel like we're missing an entire portion of the population, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, giving a diagnosis is usually pretty appropriate with substance abuse, or if you have somebody suffering from a severe mental disturbance, right? Illness of some sort, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, severe anxiety, panic attacks. Those are pretty, straightforward. But when you have your average person, right, walking through the door, and I would say this might even be the majority of the population, who you have this person that wants to work on themselves. Mm-hmm. They want to improve their relationships. They want to improve their standing in the world. They want to improve their cognitions, how they think, because they believe that that'll bring them abundance, right? Because they believe that will improve their overall experience of humanity, right? Which I believe is true. But yet, when they go into a therapist or psychologist, it's like, well, what's wrong with you? Well, there's not necessarily wrong. It's, I want to be better. I want to be the best version of myself. And isn't that what life's all about, is becoming the highest possible version of ourselves? Speaking from, honestly, quite a, conscious spiritual perspective here. But unfortunately, the field of psychology is missing the mark, because we don't have room for this. It's like a, we're robots and the error message goes off, like, error, wait, you don't have diagnosis. What do I do? Like, let me give you adjustment disorder. I swear to you guys, that's the one. Like, adjustment disorder is the one that you give clients who are, sorry to overgeneralize here, but who aren't suffering from a severe mental illness. And honestly, the system is flawed. It shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't have to give someone a title just so they can work on themselves, just so they can be the highest, best version of themselves. And so that's where coaching really fills in. That's where coaching is reaching the masses. And, we can work together, because of course, there's always going to be the question, right? I'd imagine that many coaches can relate to this. It's like you're working with a client and you're like, okay, so this person might be a little bit on the cusp. I'm not really sure how to help them with their specific symptomology. Maybe they don't fit into that category in the psychology world as the adjustment disorder. Maybe they are a little bit on the spectrum of something more serious. Maybe they have an eating disorder, right? That's a very complex issue to treat. Mm-hmm. So being cognizant of, oh my gosh, maybe this is the time that I need to refer or consult with someone who has more experience in this realm, and being okay with that, looking at that as a partnership and not necessarily out of scarcity, that the ultimate goal is to have healing for that person, right? So being able to merge together, bridge this gap, and that's what I'm, so motivated to accomplish here, is like providing consulting and consultation for coaches, making sure that if they have questions or they're unsure of how to approach a certain client, that they have a go-to person who's had years of education, background, and experience working with and studying how to work with these types of patients, and referring to them and saying, hey, this is what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially that's what I aim to create within the field of coaching.
And I love that because there is so many times, right, where maybe it is a mentality of scarcity or like I'm going to lose this client, that, something may be out of your scope. And so having people that you can sit down and maybe not completely give your client to, but sit down and be like, look, Arianna, this is what's happening with me. This is what's happening with the client. I'm recognizing that this and this might be a little out of my depth here. And I think I need to pull you in for additional help, right? Because also there might be the other side of the client doesn't want to see a psychologist, right? And so the coach can still bridge that and be kind
Yeah.
of a translator of, okay, you know what, I'm starting to recognize these and these patterns. And so maybe it's time for you to actually talk to a colleague that's more experienced in this field.
Mm-hmm. And, I urge if one were to consult with myself or someone else in the field, I urge that it's someone who's of the understanding of what coaching is about, and someone who is also, consciously open and awake around these different mental health concerns and perspectives, because I think it does take a certain level of growth and personal development on the therapist perspective and psychologist perspective to be able to say, okay, look, let's work together. And this doesn't need to be, I don't need to take your client. It's more so that we are going to work together to help your client. So we're a team. And whether that be maybe the client goes to the psychologist once a month or maybe once every other week in pairing with the coach, or maybe it's that the coach does a consultation with the therapist or psychologist with the client's permission. And that would be a form of like bridging that gap as well. So there's a couple different ways it could look depending on what's going on for the client, And I would say this too, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail in my session. But there's some markers that in psychology, kind of how we look at how well the person is kind of functioning on a daily basis. And so essentially we look at their daily functioning. How well are they able to continue maintaining their daily functions? So are they able to go to work? Are they able to get out of bed, right? Are they maintaining hygiene? Are they, eating regularly? Are they having social interactions of some sort, right? How are their relationships? Do they have any? Do they have some, right? What kind of improvements need to be made on that? And then using that as a baseline. So that's kind of how you determine, okay, if they're having problems getting out of bed, they're not able to function, they're not coming to work often, they're isolated and not able to hold relationships or things like that, though that's an indicator that there's some serious stuff underneath the surface going on, in their subconscious, truly. And so that might take some deeper digging, and it might get uncomfortable when some of that stuff comes up, which is that's a whole other topic around psychology, is that therapy is not always the most pleasant thing, right? It can, I mean, I'm sure everybody can attest that when you're doing the work, it gets uncomfortable, and it's supposed to. It's supposed to. But, I think that there's obviously varying degrees of this, and the response and reaction of how this unfolds can vary greatly on the environment. And sometimes that's why, I'm a big fan of coaching, because I think coaches have this flexibility to really create the environment that they want. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. And what I love about what coaching is bringing to the table, and to flip it the other way, is a lot of marriage and family therapists are transitioning back into coaching. And so because it's really about the accountability, because as a therapist, I mean, I could go to you for 2 years straight and hash out the same issue over and over again. And really you can't like push me to do better, right? But as a coach, you kind of can set that up in your contract of, if you're not playing all in and you're not meeting these markers, and there's a certain amount of accountability, that you can actually drop a client, right? And like push them to those levels that actually cause that change in their life, and so become a real catalyst for them.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's really complex in psychology, dropping a client. It's an ethical concern. If you need to drop a client, it's an ethical concern. There's definitely a lot of, you have to be really careful about that. And so you're right. That's such a good point with coaching, and where sometimes that big shift and that huge progress comes is, when they set up those goals, if they don't actually meet them, there's repercussions. Like they might get dropped as a client. And that's huge, so it's so true.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what are you most excited about for a Conscious Coach Conference?
I'm just so excited to meet everyone, to see the energy that's going on there. I'm really excited to kind of, share this idea that I have, because I see this happening. Like I see this bridge happening, and I believe that this is the future of not only psychology but coaching as well. Like I envision a world where we all get to work together and where we get to kind of bridge this gap, and it's so possible. And it's going to be so great because then people will feel that they are completely being ethical with how they're working with their clients on both sides of the spectrum, right? And knowing that they're supported, right? Because that's also the ultimate goal, is knowing that you're supported, right? Because one of the great things about working in the field of psychology is that, you have consultation and supervision, and you have colleagues that you consult with about clients. And you also debrief as well about clients, because sometimes you go, you hear some intense things, and you need to, be able to discuss in confidence with a colleague or a supervisor about, what's going on for you? How is this affecting you? And I think that's one thing that coaches probably suffer from, is not being able to actually, have these colleagues or appropriate people that they can confide in. And one of the number one things that they say in the world of psychology is, you never go home and talk about a client to your family. In fact, this is a legal and ethical issue, right? And not to mention, the entire side of it is you might traumatize them, by retelling the story. And so that's why it's really important to be, practicing self-care in psychology, which they teach us also, and making sure that you're using your network of colleagues who are trusted confidences to debrief and share what's happening for you. And so, I think this is where coaches can really utilize their psychologists that they decide to consult with, because this is an opportunity for them to share what's going on, and then also discuss any issues that are coming up with the client, but also making sure that they're fully supported. So it really is, it has a dual benefit, and it really is a win-win. So, I see it as a beautiful thing, being able to offer expertise, years of education, to be able to support someone, working with someone who is, like I described earlier, falls under the adjustment disorder. It's like that person that's just trying to work on themselves, but that poor person gets adjustment disorder, like, oh God, please, So, but no, I think it's important that we start to recognize some of these things. We start to talk about these things. This is why I'm so motivated to pursue my doctorate, which I'm starting in the fall as well. Because I think that, unfortunately, in the field of psychology, you have to have a certain level of credibility to, to really make waves and share with people, look, this is another way that we could be doing things, right? And so, bridging that gap, and I must say, coaches are really forging the way, which is beautiful as well.
That's awesome. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight, because one, it came up and I didn't mention it before, the permission thing, right? And really sticking to, there is two sides really of coaching: the side where you go through all of these strenuous certifications like the ICF, accomplishment coaching, and all of the others. And those do have code of ethics and that you sign, as well as psychology. But then there's, that loophole, which a lot of people are utilizing because they want to step out into the field and help people. And so there's like that legal loophole of not needing a certification and really practicing as a coach, right? And so keeping that kind of ethics aligned in coaching, I think is really important. And then also, having that support system that is so provided in psychology and other fields, right? So I did behavior therapy, where you work with children on the spectrum, and we also were told, well, not only you have to be HIPAA compliant, but you also need to have that support and have someone understand when you're like, I'm about to lose my shit.
Yeah, and it's real. Whew.
So I think that's an awesome thing to have and to provide, to keep you sane, and really also with those boundaries that come into play, right? Because if you have a client that might be on that cusp, of like starting to show markers of maybe something greater, a lot of people in general have problems with boundaries. And so how to establish safe boundaries for yourself and allowing yourself to have that boundary so you can provide self-care for yourself so you can be at 100% for your client.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's when burnout happens too.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about this a lot in the field, obviously. And burnout is huge, and it can happen to coaches too. Because at the end of the day, like you're still dealing with some heavy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and self-care is huge. But then after you're doing this for so many amount of years, you might find yourself getting burnt out. And so how do you kind of like re-find your spark, Yeah, I actually see a coach, right? Absolutely love her. She's so amazing. And she just got invited to be a adjunct professor at University of California, San Diego, UCSD. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I think she's going to be talking a lot about Reiki and like energy healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so cool to me because I see this as an indication of people in academia starting to recognize that we're missing a mark here, and there's an entire branch of healing happening that we're ignoring. And I think that this is such a huge milestone, and I think in the future this will probably be totally normal. Like I think as consciousness in humanity raises, like more and more people are waking up, and I think people are wanting to bridge this gap. And so, coaches are really on the forefront of this. And I was just so excited to hear that she has this opportunity to bridge this gap, it's amazing. So yeah, it's there's a lot of things changing and shifting in the field of psychology. And, I'm really passionate about, kind of creating my own modality and my own term because I see a need for it. It's just built out of like seeing a need and noticing that there's something I can do to help work on this. And so that's why I developed conscious psychology. And there's room for development with this. There's a lot of room in the world of psychology and bridging the gap with coaching and just healing in general, recognizing that other modalities that might not be so scientific at this moment, right, at least for now, can actually provide people with substantial healing. And sometimes the last thing that they need at the end of the day is to have a diagnosis put on them. Truly, because people take on this diagnosis as their identity. Like, oh, I have bipolar disorder. By the way, bipolar disorder is one of the top diagnoses that's misdiagnosed because people often will give bipolar disorder if they don't know what to give the person, right?
You have bipolar disorder.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, this happens all the time. It happens all the time because we're stuck. We have to give a diagnosis to treat them. Okay, well, they have mood fluctuations. Sometimes they go into mania. I guess bipolar, maybe. It's unreal. So, I think that there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, and it's time to evolve the field. It really is. Sometimes I feel like, as much as I do appreciate what Freud has offered the world of psychology and understanding the subconscious, at least beginning to understand the subconscious. But we're still kind of using a lot of the foundational principles that he founded almost 200 years ago. So I'm going, there's something wrong with this picture. We need to evolve. and evolve with the awakening. Like people are waking up, right? And so what does your awakening mean and look like? How are you experiencing it? And is it affecting your daily functioning? What's happening with you? What is your experience right now in the world? And sometimes that can be a gray area, right? Like, are you functioning or are you not functioning? Are you super stressed out or what's going on with you? And then being able to consult with a psychologist who is also on the same page as you, like, let's look at this person from a 360 view. How are they going to maintain their functioning in society, right? And are they going to thrive or are they surviving, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to shift whichever they might be in if they're in surviving mode, right? So, yeah.
I love the thriving versus surviving.
Yeah.
And
it's sorry, go ahead.
The other thing that I wanted to point out when you mentioned earlier on was, how people want to, self-development is huge, right? And it's needed because it's not taught in our educational system. So people can grow exponentially in one area, which is the area of IQ, and then completely miss the mark in EQ, right? And so it's like, you're super successful, you're thriving, but then on an emotional standpoint, you can't really handle conversations or emotions that come up. And so it's become more and more of an important subject to breach. And then, having psychologists come in and help us bridge that gap, but also with coaches with the self-development side, because the industry not only is growing, which is showing that there's a severe need for it, I'm really hoping that the education as well starts to follow in suit and really modify and start teaching, emotional intelligence in school. That would be amazing to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know. I think every psychologist should have a coach. I firmly believe that. I think every psychologist should do some sort of big personal development seminar. Just as much as I think every coach should have a psychologist that they work with regularly for consultation. It goes both ways. There's a bridge here, and we get to bridge this, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be amazing, and it's abundant, and everybody is healed and taken care of. And it's possible. So we just need to band together and know that we're all on the same mission. We're all working for the same thing. Like, we want healing, and it can happen. It's gonna happen. So it has to happen.
I love that. So in a moment, we're going to open up for questions. I have one more question for her. And then if any of the viewers or the people who are watching the replay at this time have any questions for the wonderful Arianna that woke up at 2 a.m. to be with us today, please drop them below and we will answer them, or we will ping her and have her come back and answer them after. So talk to us a little bit about what your session is going to be around. I know that we covered it briefly, but a little bit more of a description of what can they expect from you at a Conscious Coach Conference.
Sure. So definitely discussion-based. It'll be a lot around, very, very concrete and specific examples of what to look for in a client and how you know that might need consultation. So kind of diving in a little bit deeper on those like daily functionings and looking at specific markers of, are they getting out of bed? Okay. Are they interacting with other people? How are their relationships? Things like that. And then there's just a full scale of all the different areas of life. And then also talking about some of the innovations, some of the reasons why coaches are forging the way for psychologists, and bridging that gap, exploring, all these different models that people are using for healing, exploring the different ways that people are educating themselves and breaking into the field in general. Mm-hmm. And then, getting a better understanding of the self in this process as well, because that is a really cool thing, about becoming a therapist and psychologist. Is like, when you're doing all of that education, you really do a lot of work on yourself. It might not be in the form of personal development necessarily. I mean, I did that, but not everyone does that. But people do. They have huge growths from the beginning to the end of their, continuing education into the field. And a lot of it does come from like studying these different things. And it's only natural that one would self-reflect, like, how does this relate to me and my world and my existence and my interaction with humanity, right? And so there is a certain level of development that occurs. And so talking about, how does one change when they become a coach, right? And how does one make sure that they're getting that level of development that they need, right? If it's having a coach themselves or having psychologists that they consult with, things like that. And what does that development look like? How does this maybe even affect your relationships? Creating a support network around yourself, practicing self-care, essentially filling in the gap for coaches, what they might not have gotten, but what is, preached pretty strongly in the education process towards being a psychologist is like this whole self-care. How can becoming a therapist affect your own life and your own relationships and your own just existence, for good and bad, right? And so kind of filling in that and providing that for coaches at this session. So essentially it's going to be like a mini debrief on how are you doing? Like, how is this affecting you? How does this work feel in your life? And what do you need to work on to make it function with your life even better, right? Because we always have room for improvement, no matter what. So looking at multiple aspects of that.
That's awesome. So if anyone has any questions, I do have one. Well, it's kind of an observation that I would like to make that I think would be a huge benefit from your session is, in psychology, you're told that you can't really give sessions to your peers, right? To your friends or your family or anything like that. You're not supposedly supposed to analyze them. And really a lot of coaches fall into this trap of coaching everyone around them. And so I feel like creating not only a boundary for the coach, but also for their network, right? To feel safe of, if I just want to hang out with you, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm signing up for a coaching session, right? And so helping them to really distinguish that, I feel like, and put a barrier there of not always being on, because that also can get very exhausting to them to always be coaching, right?
Yeah. That's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought this up. I mean, there is a really specific reason why in the field of psychology, they say never work with someone that you're too close to. In fact, if you're unsure, like let's say a friend of a friend is referred and you're unsure if that might be unethical, like you're supposed to consult with a colleague and say, hey, this is the situation. What do you think about this? And there's a really specific reason behind this because it gets messy. And that's where burnout happens. So it's like, it's not about like, you not being able to have the flexibility of like working with whoever you want to. It's about that. It's about protecting you, truly. That's like what it comes down to. And making sure that there's terms in psychology that we have is transference and countertransference. And I'll go over this in more depth in my session, but essentially it's how the client might have their own preconceived notions kind of coming into the session when working with you. And then also how you as the person, as the either clinician, therapist, or coach have your own preconceived notions coming in. They talk about this in psychology all the time, right? As much as we try to be a blank slate, we always have our stuff that comes up, right? Especially when you're working with a client who might have a similar story to yours. And then you're going, ooh, this is sounding oddly familiar, right? Ooh, this is kind of triggering some stuff for me. So paying attention to that and then having people that you go to, right? Professionals in the field that you go to consult. So this is an area where you would say, I'm going to consult with my therapist about this, my colleague therapist. And so making sure that, you're practicing that self-care by doing that, and, setting proper boundaries. And you can always consult as well. Like, just like a psychologist can consult with another psychologist, coaches should be able to consult with the psychologist as well. Like, based on your experience, what would you say about this scenario? If I were to work with this person, and that's true too, because I'd imagine, when a coach is continually working with a lot of people very close to them, it almost gets to the point that like that becomes their identity in a sense, that their friend network and their entire work is surrounded by this concept that they're helping others and they're solving problems. And so I think one must always ask themselves the question, and as a therapist, always asking myself the same question is, what drove me into this field? What is my motivator? And why do I feel the need to fix the people around me, especially those closest to me? So making sure that those boundaries are set. It's like friends are friends, right? That's fun time. That's not that therapy isn't fun, but that has to be separate. That has to be completely separate. Because if it's not, then your mental state of being might suffer. And that's just what people in the field have discovered, and that's why they say this to us. So, and it makes a lot of sense. It really does. And sometimes you have those instances where you might be working with a client and you realize that there's some like bizarre connection. You're like, oh, they know this person who knows this person, and I know that. And you might be sitting there finding yourself listening to a conversation that you're almost like, oh gosh, this is getting very complicated and gray. Yeah. And so then that's where you consult. Like, do I tell them? Do I not tell them? Wondering about one's integrity around that, and having the room to talk about this, because we are human and we need a space to be able to talk about it. One more thing I might touch on too is like a huge faux pas. I'm in France, so of course I have to use the phrase faux pas. A big no-no in the world of psychology is having intimate relationships with clients. This is huge. In fact, therapists can do jail time for this, depending on the situation. It can be pretty severe. And the reason is because when you are a coach or you're a psychologist, you kind of automatically have this, leadership for this person, right? This kind of let me guide you, right? You're kind of maybe even at a little bit of like a pedestal for that person in some way, shape, or form. And when you move into a space, because obviously I'd imagine, with coaching, there's not so much red tape. So I'd imagine that sometimes this might happen where people might, meet someone and, engage in a relationship with them, but as a client. And this becomes incredibly complex, because that person, technically speaking, that person doesn't know anything about you as the therapist or coach. You know everything about them. Yeah. They don't know anything about you. So your relationship is already starting off one-sided. And then I beg the question, where else does that show up in your life? So looking at it from patterns, themes, right? Okay, you're having this thing come up. Having someone that you can consult with and say, okay, this is weird. I'm having these feelings. What's going on? Which, it's totally acceptable to talk about. But looking at it from a patterns perspective, like, is this something that shows up in your life in other ways, shapes, or forms? Let's explore what's going on for you. Because this person that's come into your life just might be a vehicle of healing for you to work on yourself.
Yeah. And I love the way that you put that, because when you were saying that, my mind was going to that, like, oh yeah, it's just blurring lines, right? But that example of it is one-sided, right, is really great to note. And also I want to say, a lot of coaches, they try to do it on themselves. And so consulting with others is great. And also, even if it's consulting with another coach, like a seasoned coach, I do see that on a lot of Facebook groups and things like that, where they're like, hey, I'm kind of out of my depth here. I have this client. Have you ever dealt with this before? Right. Yeah. So even if, hopefully, ideally, it would be a professional and a psychologist. But if not, and if you guys are intimidated by that, going to a more seasoned coach that has been doing this for a couple of years, because then it's kind of, you've seen a lot under the sun and you're not going to be surprised. Because if you're starting out and you're a newbie and you don't really know, you could even, damage the situation even more, re-traumatize your client or anything like that. So making sure that you guys are sturdy and in that foundation, and you have all the support that you as a coach need so that you can be the best for your client.
Absolutely. And that's the number one goal.
It is. And so we have something exciting, because we don't have any questions coming in. So if you have questions, either if you're on the replay or you're live right now, please drop them below. And then we are raffling a ticket.
Yay!
We have a winner. Do you remember the person's name, or should I say?
I do not. You should say it.
So Stevie Wright, and I will put it in our. She has won. I'm putting it in the a 3-day pass to a conference. So this is our first. Every week we will be raffling it off. So it might not just be Tuesdays, it might be Thursdays. So you guys have to tune into both AMAs to get it. Stevie, we will be emailing you your link and the fact that you won very shortly. Congratulations. And yeah, so anything else that you want to leave us with, Ari, so you can go back to sleep?
You guys are so funny. Yeah, I'm over here actually teaching a psychology course at an American university, undergraduate psychology course. And it's so funny because going through this experience, it totally reignites like, why am I doing this in the field? And what do I love so much about it? And it totally opens up my perspectives. Like when you're teaching and explaining things and exploring these topics, you grow so much as well. And so I just want to say that, you know, this conference is going to be an amazing opportunity for growth. And that is such a gift. So thank you for making that possible for people.
Thank you. I don't have anything to say. Thank you. Yes, I hope that I know that everyone that attends will walk away with something amazing and really grow. And that's the bottom line of what we're looking for. I talk to my team all the time and I'm like, you know what? Yes, the bottom line financially is important, but also the bottom line of getting them to where they want to be for their higher vision is more important for me. So yes, my financial manager doesn't like to hear that, but it's the truth.
Yeah, it's a mission.
It's the mission. It's the vision of, you know, helping empower these coaches, because there is a need in the market, right? And like we were talking about how that self-development piece is really missing. And so I'd say now more than not, like those who are behind our generation, maybe a couple of years behind us, are starting to tap into that earlier. But there's still all of the people from our age all the way up that have kind of lived their lives in this kind of like, we're just making it work. And so many people that are really underdeveloped, underfulfilled, and just kind of like going through the motions, and life should be so much more. And this is where coaches and psychologists are coming in and really helping transform lives. And so I want to help those who are helping transform lives, transform theirs, so that they can go on to do a bigger impact.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much. It was so great to see you. I'll see you at a Conscious Coach when you come back from France. Enjoy.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, Alex.